Hello, everyone. I'm Shivani Joshi. Over the next 30 minutes, we're digging into digital transformation across the globe, from communication to financial transactions to tracking important global trends. Technology touches everything we do. Digital transformation holds the potential to shape the future in endless ways and requires global cooperation so we can build that future together. Joining me now to discuss it all is Kent Walker. He's the Senior Vice President of Global Affairs at Google, and Ambassador Michael Froman, Vice Chairman and President of Strategic Growth at MasterCard. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's start with the here and now. The pandemic has ushered in a robust amount of digital adoption, but I know that both of you independently believe we haven't even scratched the surface of the potential to be unleashed. So let's talk about that as we kick things off. Mike, imagine the future a bit. What are the biggest opportunities, and what role do you think companies like MasterCard should play in the post-pandemic world to harness the potential of digital and at the same time support economic growth?
Well, thanks very much for having me. And as you said, the pandemic really underscored and perhaps accelerated trends that have been underway for some time, but it's also opened up all sorts of new opportunities. For us, it really underscored just how important it was as a company that's been focused on financial inclusion over the years to be connected to the digital economy. Whether you're an individual getting support payments from your government, pension payments from your government, et cetera, or you're a small business needing to go from being a brick and mortar shop to an online e-commerce player, connecting with your customers, connecting with your suppliers, staying relevant and surviving and hopefully thriving in the digital economy. And I think that's really underscored just how important it is that we create tools for people to join the digital economy, that we find ways of ensuring that coming out of this pandemic, that we're building back better, stronger, more inclusively, more sustainably. And I think there's some tremendous business opportunities that come with that. For us, as an example, we're working with about 100 governments around the world right now to help them do their disbursements to people more efficiently, more effectively, with less fraud, ensuring that resources get in the hands of individuals who need them, who perhaps previously had to go to a post office to pick up their pension check, as an example. Can't do that in the age of COVID. This is a new opportunity. And for small businesses, helping them get online, get digital, get paid securely, get access to capital, all because they're part of the digital economy. That opens up all sorts of new opportunities.
New opportunities and new challenges at the same time. Kent, over to you now. Similar question. What does Google believe is possible, and how are you preparing for it as a company?
Sure. As Mike said, we're not out of the woods yet. We're still seeing this terrible human cost around the world, countries like India and Brazil that are facing huge challenges. But as hard as that last year has been, it's also shown the value and the potential of technology. We've got millions of people and small businesses coming online for the first time, using digital tools to connect. 1/3 of businesses are saying that they were able to stay open because of digital connections. And that's before you even talk about the scientific innovation, the ability to share data and prototype that gave us vaccines in such record-setting time. There was an article just last week in Nature that talked about the exposure notification app that we and Apple developed together that prevented hundreds of thousands of infections and probably saved thousands of lives. So that's a real reminder of the real world impact that tech innovation can have on people's lives. We forget that we've doubled life expectancy over the last century alone, and there's a lot more to come. We obviously talk a lot about innovations like self-driving cars and artificial intelligence, but even quantum mechanics on the horizon. These things are going to help us solve some of our biggest challenges, from sustainability to healthcare to global development. So it's been great to see the bipartisan consensus that's emerging around the importance of investing in new R&D, working together, this combination of crisis and consensus that might actually lead America to double down on the amount of innovation we're doing, creating, we hope, a national innovation strategy with support for startups, with immigration reforms for top talent, with more public and private partnerships, and skills training, because that's a key piece. It's not just about giving all of us better tools. We need responsible innovation. We need tools that work for everybody so that they're on-ramps into this digital economy. That's why we're so happy, so pleased to be able to partner with more than 100 other companies on this career certificate program we launched last year to get people qualifications for high-paying, high-growth jobs that don't require a college degree, because you shouldn't need a college diploma to get a decent income. And we're very optimistic about the future of that.
Yeah, and that's a big trend in the tech space. I'm living in the Bay Area. It's a big part of the public discourse here. Mike, I want to pick up on the theme of transformation, of innovation. It's a beneficial concept, but it does have challenges that come with it. The digital divide and the pandemic have laid to bear inequities in our financial system. How can AI and data help address these challenges?
Well, it's a really good point. And as Kent was just saying, there's so many opportunities that are created through technology. We've got to be doubly focused on ensuring that we're not seeing a new digital divide emerge, whether that's literal broadband divide, that there's still parts of this country and certainly vast parts of the world that have no access to broadband internet, but also how data science itself is used. One thing that we've been focused on is, to answer your question, working with the Rockefeller Foundation, we created something called data.org, which really focuses on how to bring the benefits of data science and data analytics that have advanced so much in the private sector and bring those benefits to the public sector and the civic and social sector to make sure we're taking those tools and applying them to some of the biggest and most significant social and economic challenges that we face as a country and as a society. I think AI and data science, as you say, could be very, very helpful there, but we have to be quite intentional about it. One, ensuring that we're not building biases into our AI algorithms that can further divide our society. And secondly, making sure that those tools are fully available to as broad a part of our society as possible and that they're being used for good purposes. And again, that's a really important area of focus for not just us, but lots and lots of other companies, making sure that we're bringing those tools to the table in a way that has broader social impact.
Mike makes a good point about trust and integrity, and events like SolarWinds and the most recent pipeline attack undermine trust in a very connected world. How does Google view how companies and governments need to respond in some sort of partnership opportunities?
Yeah, it's absolutely right. The issue of network security, particularly critical infrastructure, government networks, is something that everybody on this call should be deeply concerned about. I started my career prosecuting computer crimes for the Department of Justice, and at Google, we're deeply focused on cybersecurity. We invest billions in network security tools. As we've all moved our lives online in the last year, the safety of those digital tools becomes even more crucial. So that's why we're putting privacy security at the forefront of our products so that people feel safer with Google. We know that people care about this. In the last year, we saw millions of people a day, more than ever before, visit our safety center, use our security checkup tools, et cetera. But more broadly, beyond any one company, how do we beef up the security of online systems that we all rely on? I think in the US, the recent executive order from the White House is a good start. It raises the bar for security practices. It lays out 8 different areas where we can modernize and strengthen US government networks. But both government systems and the private sector have a long way to go here. We need modern zero trust architectures that don't take anything for granted. We need key players to diversify their IT platforms so they're not keeping all their eggs in one basket and we're not relying on a vulnerable monoculture. And so we look forward to working with the administration and other governments to implement best practices for cybersecurity.
Mike, along with this is the issue of governance. As technology adoption becomes more ubiquitous, there's been debate around the globe about how technology should be regulated. And I know that MasterCard and 20 other companies out there recently announced support for a new digital governance initiative proposing the creation of data technology, a forum around data and technology by the G7 to strengthen international coordination and consensus across the globe. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I think just like coming out of the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, there was a real need to bring together governments and regulators around the table. Not that we're going to all adopt exactly the same regulation, but that at least we're avoiding going off into different directions and creating unnecessary frictions in the system. And then it was the Financial Stability Board that really stepped up and brought the financial regulators to the table. Here, what we're talking about is a data and technology forum that can bring the relevant folks from different governments around the table to wrestle with these challenging issues around privacy, around data flows, around technology standards, around the AI issue that you raised, and to share those perspectives. One challenge for us is that each government is set up quite differently when it comes to data and technology. Some have a data ministry or a data transformation person in their government, and others don't. And so getting the right group of people, because this cuts across financial sector, cuts across the real economy, cuts across a lot of different agencies, getting the right people around the table from like-minded countries who can begin to put together a coherent way of addressing these issues. Privacy is just one example. The Europeans, in many respects, have been ahead of the rest of the world in developing GDPR on privacy protections. But how can you, the question is, and I think that set a global standard that is now spreading elsewhere around the world. I think the question is, how can you protect privacy, which is absolutely critical, and at the same time, enjoy the benefits of innovation that Kent referred to that come from an open digital economy. And I think there is a way of doing that. And I think in many respects, we have moved a bit towards Europe when it comes to privacy. And in many respects, Europe, I think, is moving in the other direction to understand, particularly in the context of COVID, just how important it has been to be able to share information across borders that have led to vaccine development, that have led to the public health response. So there's a lot of good work to be done here. We think the G7 and its framework can be a good basis for it, and to broaden out from there so that you have more and more countries who share that perspective, particularly at a time when there are a lot of alternative perspectives out there as well.
That's right. There's a lot to consider. And Kent, let's stay on the topic of regulation. What do you think are the most important questions that regulators should be thinking about when they confront big cross-border challenges?
Well, Mike does a great job of highlighting three key points: how international cooperation can minimize fragmentation, the fact we need interoperable solutions for all this, and the fact we need to have a broad set of stakeholders at the table to make sure we get it right. Because we're well beyond the question of whether or not to regulate in some of these areas. The harder question is how to regulate well. Nobody wants fragmented or inconsistent regulation across issues or across countries, or even between U.S. states. Divergent, inconsistent regulations just increase complexity and cost for everyone, including startups and small businesses who are using digital tools. So, for example, everyone recognizes that a federal privacy law would be better than a patchwork of state efforts across 51 different regions governing in inconsistent ways. We've got countries from the US to the UK to Turkey to Russia who want to regulate online content in different ways. And even beyond geography, we're increasingly seeing tensions between legitimate interests and different kinds of values. So, for example, competition regulators want to see more data shared. Privacy regulators often want to see less data shared. How do we reconcile those tensions and work with governments to get to good, robust answers? We think the goal is to develop sensible regulations on questions like privacy and competition and taxation and artificial intelligence and content moderation that address these shared issues in a holistic way, that minimize the unintended side effects, and then that are aligned and, if possible, interoperable.
Mike, GDPR kicked off a wave of privacy regulations around the world, but it has also kicked off a challenge for data flows. How important are data flows and data transfer mechanisms?
Well, I think they are critical, and it goes to the innovation that technology makes possible. Look, I'll give you one example. To build on something Kent said earlier, we're very much involved in cybersecurity as well. And our ability to see transactions all over the world and to see cyber intrusions all over the world and compare them and see patterns evolve has allowed us to save banks and central banks tens of billions of dollars over the last few years by being able to identify a new form of cyber intrusion and to stop it. If you have national clouds, bifurcated internets, balkanized internets, you only get to see a part of the picture, and you don't get to see those patterns that are emerging across the world. It's that ability to see something emerge in Ukraine, Nigeria, the Philippines, and Cleveland, Ohio, that allows you to say this is a new threat. And if you don't have that ability to see those cross-border data flows, it becomes much, much more difficult, and it ends up hurting rather than helping. Doesn't mean that you don't have to deal with privacy issues. Absolutely, you have to deal with privacy issues. But you can deal with both and not lose the benefits of an open digital economy.
Yeah, it's a fine balancing act there. Kent, governments are moving to erect regulatory frameworks on specific technologies, I know as well. What approach needs to be taken that factors in risks, but at the same time limits overreach? Because I know you have to weigh both of those considerations.
There's always a balance between new technology and efficiency and creativity, and making sure that democracies are able to have oversight and make sure that there's equity folded into this, so that we do have tools that work for everybody. We close the digital divide. We make sure that the kid in a poor inner city neighborhood has the same access to technology as a kid growing up in a more affluent environment. So a lot of the work we're doing is trying to lower the cost of innovation and make it accessible to everybody. Many of our services are free, and we're trying to find other ways to partner with other companies to make sure that those tools are as broadly available as possible.
Mike, anything to add here?
Look, I just think technology is moving much faster than governments have tended to move in the past. And there needs to be, I think, an approach that sets out some principles and sets out some standards and allows innovation to proceed, but is on the lookout for the risks that might emerge. I say something about standards, if I can. I think historically we've probably done less good job in the United States of pursuing standards around the world than some of our competitors and from other parts of the world. And it's becoming more and more important that we have a seat at the table. We, the United States, has a seat at the table in trying to help define these standards to ensure that they are striking the right balance. And so that's governments, the private sector, in collaboration with each other, working to ensure that those standards are being developed in a way that reflects our interests and our values.
Ken, we know that the digital transformation has brought the world economically closer together, and in a span of months during the pandemic, even small or medium-sized businesses became global ones thanks to technology. How important is interoperability between regulatory frameworks and cross-border operations? How does that work? How do you meld it together to create more seamlessness?
Shemai, you're absolutely right. We are seeing Main Street going global. Many of these small businesses are reaching new audiences, new markets, not just around their country, but around the world. And that's a real powerful engine of growth for everybody. But at the same time, that also means that having common standards is increasingly important, because you don't want to have to navigate 190 different rules around the world if you're a small business. So, Europe's already started working on common regulation of technologies across their common market. Importantly, I think the next stage is some of the work that Mike and others are doing with the G7, but also the OECD on common tax frameworks, the WTO, even the UN are playing key roles in convening voices, getting people together to talk about collective solutions that provide guidance. Sometimes that's standard setting, sometimes that's co-regulation, sometimes that's industry regulation. That helps level the playing field for all of us. And the goal there is to have useful, implementable, interoperable regulations that don't duplicate and don't sort of step on each other's toes. You've already seen Europe calling for a transatlantic dialogue on trade and technology. We think that's a useful step. And I think the US has an opportunity to be a real leader in these processes. The administration seems to be leaning in here, because at the end of the day, there's a natural complementarity between democracy and technology. That's a timeless and a necessary and done right, a productive relationship. So it's never been more important for all of us to work together on these governance frameworks that both address the issues and facilitate innovation that helps everybody.
Absolutely. And Mike, another thing we have to consider are trade agreements. What role do they have to prevent digital economic regulation from taking an industry policy bend? Because we know it also has to be fair and equitable in terms of that as well.
I think there's been a lot of good work done over the last several years on through the trade framework on these sorts of issues. Working on digital economy issues, for example, in the Obama administration, then made its way into the U.S. Mexico Canadian agreement and the U.S. Japan agreement. It's part of what I understand is being negotiated between the U.S. and the U.K. And at the same time, there's a lot of interesting work going on in the Asia Pacific with Singapore, New Zealand, Australia, Chile, South Korea, Japan, looking at digital economy frameworks. I think it creates a real opportunity to set a high standard for how to make sure that there is appropriate regulation and that we're able to maintain the benefits of an open digital economy. And I think between that and some of the work that we discussed earlier that could start in the G7 and go beyond that, it really begins to create that kind of coalition of the ambitious who can come together and set high standards for what is an increasingly important part of our economy.
Kent, I want to talk about something more futuristic, even though at Google it is not in the future. AI, artificial intelligence, and opportunities around that are massive in the tech space. And we know that Google is really part of the forefront of bringing this and immersing it in all parts of commerce and different parts of the economy. How big does Google believe AI, this opportunity, could be? And how do you think about responsible innovation? Because we know that those considerations are also work hand in hand and go in tandem with the development of that technology.
Yeah, but both sides of that question are extraordinarily important. We are very optimistic about the potential of artificial intelligence, machine learning. We're already seeing it in daily lives with companies around the world using tools to improve the way they conserve energy or handle retail stocking or provide financial services. There are opportunities in healthcare and lots of other areas. And that's before you get into the sort of generations of things where we can improve agricultural productivity or maybe contribute to bring clean water to people around the world. So this next generation of tools is going to be really powerful, and we're very excited about it. At the same time, we recognize that as you roll out new tools and new services, it has to be on a robust framework of trust. You have to have people believing that you have both the capability and the integrity and the intent of doing the right thing. And that's why we're so interested in partnering with others, working with governments, being very public about our AI principles, our responsible innovation programs, to talk about how do we make some of these trade-offs and balances between transparency and accountability, between equity and efficiency. These are going to be important discussions to have. The US has already put out a series of AI principles. Europe has put out some draft proposals in the last few months. We're very engaged in making sure that we can share the benefits of our experience and we can learn from others as we collaboratively move this whole sector of mathematics and ultimately of the economy forward.
Yeah, it's a huge opportunity, as we know as well. And Mike, within the fintech space, also a massive opportunity. Digital payments have exploded, not just for the big firms, for the small firms, for the medium-sized firms. We touched upon that earlier. Every business can be a global business in this environment. What's the upside for these companies? And what's the biggest hurdle in your mind and the way that MasterCard thinks about it?
Well, I think for parts of this ecosystem, it is going digital and integrating technology into their operations. And I'll just give you one example that we work very closely with a whole series of community development financial institutions, CDFIs, and have been working with them to help them upgrade their technology so that they can serve their customers who tend to be oftentimes excluded from the regular banking system, help them get access to credit efficiently. It worked out very well in that we had helped some of them, such as the Community Reinvestment Fund, put in place technology that when COVID hit, they were able to push through loans, billions of dollars of loans to their customers in a way that they would not have been able to without technology. So part of it is just getting over the hump of digitizing the operations. I think that's true of a lot of micro and small businesses too, who need a lot of help just getting online. If you're a small business, you don't want to spend 25% of your time doing paperwork. You want to be able to digitize as much of that as you can, automate it as much as you can, be able to spend your time serving your customers and developing new products and the like. And I think that is again, it creates a great opportunity, but there's also an obstacle there that needs to be overcome. Some of that can be done with technology. Some of it can be done through mentoring and helping to train micro and small business owners. One thing we focused on now is how to include literally tens of millions of micro and small businesses and women-owned businesses in particular into the digital economy to help them succeed and thrive going forward.
Yeah, what you're doing is talking about the digital divide. And Kent, I know you alluded to the digital divide and the steps that Google is taking to help narrow it closer. How is the company addressing it specifically in different parts of the world? Because it's not just an issue here in the United States, it is a global issue. What is Google's perspective on it?
In the United States, over the course of the last year, we built on the work of Google.org to make significant contributions to some of the community financial institutions Mike was talking about a moment ago, to make sure that people have the resources and the capital to be able to get into these new areas of the economy that have so much potential. When you're talking internationally, much of the work we're doing is building tools that are accessible that in ways that they weren't before. The fact that if you live in India, you can purchase an Android phone for $30, $40, $50 and suddenly be connected to a global world of information that may help you know when to plant your crops or where to take your fish catch to market. That's incredibly empowering for small villages and businesses around the world. So we're very focused on trying to make sure that there's the old line that the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed yet. We want to make sure we distribute it as widely as possible. And digital tools actually turn out to be a remarkably powerful way of doing that.
In our last couple of minutes here, gentlemen, I want to ask you some final thoughts. What role, and I'll start with you, Mike, what role should the U.S. play in developing regulatory frameworks? What advice would you give to the Biden administration on filling that role? And Mike, you did allude to executive orders. Both of you alluded to executive orders issued last week. Anything more that the administration should consider?
Well, absolutely. Look, I think first and foremost, coming back to the table, engaging internationally, and being willing to exert political capital to show U.S. leadership abroad is absolutely important. And I found when I was in government that the only thing our allies and partners resented more than U.S. being overbearing is U.S. indifference. And they really want the U.S. at the table. And on these issues in particular, where we have so much innovation going on, where we have some of the leading countries of the world when it comes to technology platforms, we have the most vibrant fintech sector, for example, as well. So both large and small, legacy and innovative, there's just so much going on. We have a lot to bring to the table with our allies and partners, and through our engagement, work with them to come up and reach consensus around a set of appropriate regulatory responses that allows that innovation to continue and does so in a responsible way. And one thing I would just add to the previous comment, when you look around the world, there is so much that is yet to be done to ensure that everybody participates in the digital economy. And I would just flag digital identity as being part of that. You still have over 1 billion people who have no formal identity. And making sure that as they're brought into the digital economy, that we're not putting their data at risk. It's not some big honeypot of information of biometric information that can be hacked, but that we're creating a framework and an architecture that allows it to be privacy by design and still allows them to participate in the benefits of the digital economy.
Kent, anything to add here?
I agree with Mike's framework here. We're seeing this incredible potential, but we want to make sure that it's exercised responsibly. At a time when there's declining trust in institutions in the United States, American pride in the advances we've had in science and technology is one of the bright spots. And we need to work with our government and with governments around the world to make sure that everybody has those benefits. There are policy components to it, and there are technology components as well. One of the books on my bookshelf is called Out of the Box, about how the rise of the standardized shipping container actually raised living standards around the world by taking friction out of the global economy. So there's a role for trade agreements, and there's also a role for technology in making sure everybody has a share in this digital future.
Mike and Kent, thank you so much for your time and your insights today.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for having us.